Hey everyone, it's great to talk to you again. Here we are, Burden on Society, the sports edition. We're talking Purdue versus New Orleans and the recap. And it started off this way. So the game started with the caveat that Zach Edey was not going to play because he had the flu. So then the question is, so where does the team go from there? How do they react? And to truthfully tell you, it was not pretty early on. I even called the game, at least in the first half, the tale of two halves to the first half. Early on, it was sloppy, indecisive, and flat. Then after about the 10-minute mark, all of a sudden it was aggressive, sharp, and hustling. The guys looked great. And early on, it really appeared Purdue wants to make the extra pass and not put a shot up, even if they are generally pretty decently open. I'm sure Coach Painter stresses making the extra pass to get a great shot. But sometimes working the clock all the way down to 5 seconds and trying to make the perfect play becomes a poor option for an offense, especially one without Zach. So, at about the 16-minute mark, Lawyer threw up a three that went in nicely. And then it seemed like people were ready to start shooting instead of passing when it wasn't needed. That's what it kind of looked like. But it was short-lived, as in about one, maybe minute and a half or so, span right around the 13-minute mark. New Orleans drains 2 threes and a 2. Meanwhile, Purdue put up like one bad shot and then committed an offensive foul. Things like lackluster play popped in again, for instance, covering a guy like Jordan Johnson, who's the best shooter they have on their team, and he had like 2 3-pointers in the first 6 minutes. He had to be in the game plan, you would think, and Purdue was aware of him throughout the game, and it was already an up-and-down game all the way through the 13-minute mark. But Trey Kaufman-Renn was allowing the New Orleans guys to chest up to him, and he seemed like he was a little lost at first. In the Big Ten, it's going to get a lot worse, and that was my first thoughts, and I thought, man, he's going to be bodying around. But then at about the 12-and-a-half mark, TKR took it to him. He got a foul, bucket, and got a three-point play, and he was off to the races after that. Now, but another slow spurt as like a 10-second violation was shortly followed by the center who had like a shot of 1 3-pointer all season. He tosses it up with 1 second left and banks it in. And I thought, here we go. What is going on? You could call it karma when you're not aggressive enough. And that's kind of the way it looked. But around the 10 to 9 minute mark, Purdue down 2 at that point and has just one shot in over a 2-minute period. So there were 3 open threes in one trip, I remember. All 3 Purdue players faked and never got a shot off. Finally, after a missed shot, there was an offensive rebound and First puts it in for the first bucket in like 5 minutes for the Boilermakers. During that stretch, there was 1 made free throw and 2 misses. That's all the offense. Finally, the next trip down is the semi-fast break, and Fletch drains another 3 to finally get the crowd into it. Yes, it was ugly so far through that point. There was no flow. It was tentative. It was flat. But Mason Gillis had 9 points. He was the only bright spot so far in the game, plus First's energy, and of course, Lawyer had drained a couple. The game starts to change, though, for the rest of the half. As the tight D, they started tightening up on New Orleans. It flustered them for the last 5 to 7 minutes, and it turns out that New Orleans didn't score for 9 minutes. Purdue goes on an 18-zip run and takes control of the game. It can't be said enough, defense leads to offense. It ended up being a 24-2 run for the last 9 minutes of the half, and Purdue was up 41-21 at the break. So the second half, I started to think they're going to come out, they're going to be strong. And it started off a little more aggressive. The first couple minutes, it was back and forth, but New Orleans seems to get a couple lucky bounces, and it leads to a 3, and then Purdue goes cold for about 4 minutes. A New Orleans guard clearly gets 3, arguably maybe even 4 steps crossing the lane, and he scoops up and under Morton for some wild non-basket basket because he definitely traveled. And all of a sudden, it's a 13-point game. With that, there were 14 minutes left in the second half, and from then on, TKR takes over, and the team follows. The lead got back to 20. Now, there was even a point where a guy flopped on TKR, and it appeared that the refs were favoring New Orleans up to that point pretty heavily in most of the calls. I thought maybe they were trying to let them get into it. There was a lot of grabbing. There was a lot of holding, pushing. Nothing was called. But finally, the guy flops, and at first I thought maybe he flopped. He didn't. It's a tough call for the refs. It did kind of look like a flop more when they started showing it in slow-mo. But at one stretch, midway through the second half, New Orleans hits like 12 of 14 shots to keep them close. And by close, I mean it was 15 points. Now, Lawyer, I got to say, where was he? He did seem to pop up occasionally, but he seemed doubtful or distracted. It just wasn't quite what we're used to for him. I think he'll rebound pretty good. Now, TKR, awesome. Player of the game. He's the pog. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. First was solid. Smith was solid. Gillis was great. Lawyer was, I would call it ho-hum for him. You know, when you score, what did he score here? Fletcher scored 8 points. That's ho-hum for him. But it was nice to see the guys off the bench force the shot clock violation with only 1 minute left in the game. Still hustling hard. Probably just like all of them do during the practice. So the game ended 74-53. The number one team in the country is now 12-0. After a well-fought early campaign next week, they'll return against Florida A&M. So it was very good up to this point. We're going to return against Florida A&M after about 10 days off. They'll be back on the 29th. And then they're into Big Ten play against Rutgers and Ohio State right away. So some quick takes on Purdue. First, after a rough start, great defense and good hustle got them a good, strong lead by the end of the first half. But it seems like this team coasts a bit when it gets up, and that appeared to be what looked like happened at times in the second half. Yes, they seemed to be working hard still, I like that, but New Orleans was scrappy and working hard themselves. So New Orleans' hard work seemed to be the entire game, as Purdue seemed to be maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the game. It's hard to nitpick the number one team in the country, but flat spots do show up. So people are unwilling to shoot instead of making extra pass for maybe even a better wide open shot. I'm sure that's been beat into them by the coach, but sometimes you just got to take your shot so you don't make a rougher shot later. Now, I can remember close to 10 possessions, maybe where the Boilermakers passed up good shots for more good shots and then ended up either with a poor shot or a rough shot near the end of the shot clock. Lots of shots, right? But better decision-making on some of those open shots and taking them fully, not just standing flat-footed and shooting because you're wide open, might make up for some of the misses they've been having as of late. But I also believe they'll get into line here pretty quickly in the next few weeks as they press into the Big Ten season. So while the shooting slump continued, it was better than it was before. It looks like the percentages went up. 3-point percentage was at 30%, at least in the first half. It's back down to 17 in the second half. So something to work on. Here's what after the press conference after the game, Coach Painter said. Here's some of the highlights. He said, like he always does, it was great. You could see it. New Orleans did some great things, and they played hard. Once again, we didn't shoot well, is what the coach said from 3. Trey Kaufman played great. Caleb was a bit under the weather, but I thought it was a great that he battled through it. That's what the coach said. Mason was able to play a lot of great minutes after being out, and Brandon Smith's effect on the game was huge. Look, when he's out there, he makes things happen. He makes things go with the decision-making, toughness, and his ability to make it up. Great game. Hopefully, Zach gets some rest, and he'll be back on the 29th. Coach also said, we always say let's get to their backups because who has good backups? Well, we do. That's why we want to get to their backups with our backups. They're much better. It's nice having like 9 or 10 guys that could be starters. Mason said this, it's just next man up, as they had learned from the last couple of years with COVID and the like. When asked about Zach and being out, that's what he said. And then they asked how he was, and he said he was feeling great now after his back issues. They talked to Braden a little bit. He says it was a little different than just tossing it up to Zach, but Trey was able to get out and do his thing, and it worked out. Next man mentality, he posted about also. Now, Trey, they asked him about his footwork. Now, he's been known for that. For him, it says comes naturally, which we can all see. But he has been getting more time to work on it this year. So maybe it's getting a little better, even though it was great already. And with Zach out, I tend to get a few more low post touches, which is more my game and can get more in a rhythm. Coach Painter has recruited guys who want to win. This is what Trey said. And sure enough, that's what you're getting. Trey came in, 24 points. Second on the list was Mason Gillis with 11. It just seems like he was out there hustling, shooting great. Some of the guys shooting-wise, it was off at times, like I said. 3-pointers in the first half, 30%. Just 4 for 13. In the second half, 1 for 6. We can't keep going 5 for 19 for nights when it comes with the big boys. But I think they're going to start falling better. Same thing with things like the free throws. Okay, we missed 3 free throws in the first half, but they always seemed like it was at a point when you really needed them. 5 for 8 in the first half. And field goal wise, we were 60% in the first half and 50% in the second because the short field goals and Trey, just like when Zach's in there, kind of makes up for a lot of those other shooting percentages. Let's see, there were a couple blocks here or there. Nobody did anything really big other than the points. Mason Gillis had a couple steals. That's awesome right there. Rebounding wise, looks like Ethan Morton had 7 rebounds to lead the team. That's pretty good from a guy who was quiet. He only had 2 points. He only took a couple shots, but he had 7 rebounds and 3 assists. That's the glue kind of guy that Painter likes to have and Purdue fans are used to. So there was a lot going on there. It looks like they came through pretty strong. You could see how they changed after about that 10-minute mark and started to realize they can score, they can play defense, and they can be a team. They scored close to their normal average for the season without Zach, and I think they're just going to be stronger from this as they go forward. So next week, there'll be another game after a pretty long break. You guys have a great Christmas, and we'll talk to you maybe once or twice before the next game.